I tend to be pretty critical about a lot of books, and I don't hand out 10 out of 10s easily. I love diving deep into stories and dissecting everything from characters and world building to dialogue and pacing, and really pulling them apart piece by piece and critiquing them. It's all part of my reading experience, the way that I enjoy reading and reviewing books. Now, it's important to remember that being critical or critiquing something is not inherently negative. It's about looking at something through as much of an objective lens as you possibly can, despite some of your biases, and making a statement on the quality, which can be positive or it can be negative. Now, lately I've done a couple reviews that landed mostly in the negative, so today I'd like to share with you some truly exceptional books that I believe deserve a perfect score. Some of these gems might be nestled in the middle of a series, so hopefully they'll give you something to look forward to as you dive into the others. I also may have some surprise guests drop in to tell you about the books that they consider 10 out of 10s as well. So get your TBR list ready, because hopefully this video will help you add some new series to your ever-growing backlog. Within the last few weeks, I posted a video on why Lies of Locke Lamora is a masterpiece, which is actually what inspired me to make this video. So I won't be talking about that one here. Instead, I'll link that video in the annotations above so that you can watch it yourself. Maybe I'll link it in the description as well. I'm really proud of that video and I put a lot of work into it, so I really hope you enjoy it. My first choice for a perfect 10 out of 10 book is Reign of Madness, the second book in the King's Dark Tidings series by Kel Cade. I've made a Why You Should Read King's Dark Tidings video, which I will link in the description and in the annotations if you want more info on the series itself. But as for the second book, it simply nails everything from front to back. There is not a single misused page. The pacing is at a breakneck speed, even in the small quiet moments where characters are just chatting with each other. It has an incredibly intriguing plot about a group of strangers who have all been chosen by a mysterious stranger, Rezkin, to be on a ship together and go to the King's Tournament in a faraway country where these expert sword masters will fight against each other in a gladiator-style arena for riches and fame. Is that description not insanely enticing? For real, this book is not only fun, but it perfectly nails all the categories that I typically review something on. The plot is clearly intriguing, the characters are very, very deep, and you get to know them so well. The friendships they make will warm your heart for years to come, and the dialogue between them is impeccable. Some of my favorite moments are when all of these strangers are stuck on a ship together, initially not trusting of each other, and they have nothing to do except talk to each other and figure out why they're all there. The conversations feel completely fleshed out. They feel like conversations people would actually have. And by the way, for the love of God, please listen to the audiobook for this one. You will not regret it, I promise you. It is amazing, one of my favorite audiobooks of all time. I cannot stress how good the dialogue is in this book. I would say it may even be the very best part of the book, but dialogue aside, the world building is incredible. You learn about every little town that they stop at along the way, including Keldara, where the tournament is, and each place they stop at is very unique in the way that society works in each place, and you'll see this even more over the next two books, actually more so, I would say. You also learn about the magic users in this world and other career paths throughout the kingdoms, and the ending of the book will make you feel so many emotions. You'll immediately want to either reread this book or start the next one, I promise. And all of this happens after an action-packed final quarter of the book where some of the coolest action scenes I've ever read will play out. I have other books I want to get to, so I don't want to stay on this book for too long, but please read this. It's been in my top 3 favorite series for a few years now, and I don't see anything knocking it out of its spot for a long time. You'll obviously have to read the first book to get to this one, but the first book is extremely short. I think it's like a 5 or 6 hour audiobook, so it's really not that bad. Now, I mentioned that I reached out to some other content creators to get their take on the whole 10 out of 10 thing, and I want to pass the conversation to MJ Kuhn, one of the co-hosts of the SFF Addicts podcast, and also the author of Among Thieves, and a great friend of ours. Let's see what she has to say. I'm also watching these for the first time with you guys, so this will be kind of fun to react to a bit. I think I know what MJ's is because I think she gave it away in her Twitter message, but the other ones I have no idea.
I'm MJ Kuhn, and my 10 out of 10 read that I'm going to be talking about is Kings of the Wild. Longtime listeners of the show will not be surprised by this because I'm pretty sure I've talked about this book on the show, like in a whole episode before. But for anyone that's not familiar, so Kings of the Wild is a band of adventurers who were super famous back in their day, but now they're old and they're out of shape and they have to get back together for one last adventure to save one of the band members' daughters. The reasons why this book is a 10 out of 10 read for me, there's a whole bunch of them. First of all, I think it's a very creative spin, a very original spin on a lot of tropes that I personally really love. You got the found family trope, you've got the adventure fantasy and, traveling across the realms and, having all of these adventures. But it's got these really great and interesting spins on it because the characters are not in the prime of life anymore, right? They're older and they're struggling with, bad knees and other things that those of us that are also old understand. Another reason it's a 10 out of 10, lovable cast of characters. You've got all of them are great. Clay Cooper is a favorite. He's the main character. But Moog the wizard is probably my absolute favorite if I had to pick one. But all the characters, they have different strengths. They have different flaws. And together they have this really kick-ass dynamic that I very much enjoyed. Another reason why? This book is funny. It's so funny. I love a book that can make me laugh, or at least make me do the, I'm reading a book alone laugh, which is kind of like this. Right? And this book got me to do that laugh a whole bunch of times. But it's not just, all fun and jokes. There's some really heartfelt moments in this. There's some tear-jerking moments, especially as you get towards the end of this book. Even in the beginning, it's basically like the trope, or not trope, but the stereotype of humor and heart. This book has humor and heart. I also really like that it's self-contained. So there is a second book, which is on my shelf. Ooh, I can't point. I suck at this, but it's that blue one. Bloody Rose. That is like a sequel of sorts to it, but this book is completely self-contained and it tells a full story. It can be read as a standalone, which I suck at finishing series. I just get distracted and I want to read something else. So I love that this was self-contained. And then the last reason why it's a 10 out of 10 read is just if you guys have ever watched anything with Nicholas Eames, if you've ever had the pleasure of interacting with him, he's just a really delightful and kind person, which I know is not a prerequisite for loving a book, but it makes me love the book a little bit more. So there you go. Those are the reasons why Kings of the Wild is a 10 out of 10 read for me.
Yeah, she's so right. That book is incredible. And if you haven't seen it, we did do an episode with her where we discussed the book in full, and then we did another episode with her and Nicholas Eames. So if you would like to check that out, then definitely look through our YouTube library, whatever, our list of videos, or just search Fantasy Files Kings of the Wild, because it's definitely up there as far as some of the better episodes that we've done. And she's right, Nicholas Eames is just an absolutely incredible person, and I love this book too. I don't think it's a perfect 10 out of 10 read for me. It's one of my favorite books. I've reread it a few times now, and I love to go back to it and have such a great time with it. But yeah, I'm so glad that was her pick, because it's such an incredible book. It definitely deserves that spot. So the second book that I'm picking for this list is Changes, the 12th book in the Dresden Files. So if you want to read this, you'll have to get through 11 others, but it will be the most worthwhile reading experience you've ever had. Maybe even more so than King's Dark Tidings, if I'm being honest. There's a reason why the Dresden Files has been my #1 favorite series since I was 19, and I cannot recommend it enough. Also, it helps that most of the books before this one are very short, usually a 7 to 8 hour audiobook. The really early ones might even be like 5 or 6 hours, and I promise you will want to keep reading. It won't feel like a chore, and you'll thank your lucky stars that there are so many books to consume, and you can just keep going and going. So obviously, I can't say too much about Changes, given that it's so deep into the series, but I will say that if a movie were to be made from any single Dresden Files book, it should be this one. The pacing is cruising at a steady 100 miles per hour right from the first sentence of this book, and it does not stop until the very end. It's all the usual stuff that you can expect from a Dresden Files book. Great dialogue, great plot that twists and turns, great characters and world building, but it also has the benefit of kind of being the end cap to the first half of the series. It's aptly named Changes, as many parts of Harry's life are changing permanently, some of which are good changes and some of which are awful. Things will never ever be the same after this book, and it really is the culmination of everything these characters have worked for over the past 11 books. It does a great job of kind of wrapping up a lot of the previous plot threads, but then starting new ones that will lead you into the second, I think, more mature half of the Dresden Files series. I always say that the first half of the Dresden Files is kind of a borderline Monster of the Week show like Supernatural or Buffy, but Changes is the linchpin that ushers us into the era of epic urban fantasy. And all of these books kind of connect together, but I would say the second half is where you see the results of how those all connect. Also, in this book, you will see some of the most massive scaled battles I've ever seen in a book, at least until later on you see even bigger ones. But up until now, this has some of the biggest battles in the series with some of the craziest weapons and powers. It's literally the book where everyone levels up and has to get ready to take on the next scale of enemies. They kind of, early in the Dresden Files, they're kind of at street level, and they're dealing with monsters in alleyways and stuff. And this is like the second, third, or fourth tier of enemies, and they really have to up their game. Now, I'll take a second to tell you that we are going book by book through the Dresden Files, and we just recently posted our episode on Cold Days, and each episode is new reader friendly, so it doesn't spoil any books beyond the one that we're discussing in a given video. So go check those out if you're a new reader, or even if you've read the whole series. And if you're just now deciding to pick up the Dresden Files, and it's a great series of episodes to watch as you read through the books, because we'll answer a lot of the questions that you probably have. Any confusion you might have, we might be able to clear up in those. So, speaking of the Dresden Files, Jake Bishop is a good friend of ours, a fellow YouTuber who has been on our channel a lot to talk about the Dresden Files as we go through book by book, and he also recently got to interview Jim Butcher, so definitely go check that out. It is a fantastic interview, probably one of the best Jim Butcher interviews in my opinion, and I don't feel like I'm being biased by him being a friend of ours. I genuinely think it is an amazing interview. And he has really great nuanced takes on various books, not just Dresden Files, but just anything. And he often forces me to think a little harder about what I'm reading. So let's see what his 10 out of 10 book is, shall we?
Hello everyone. For my pick for a 10 out of 10 book, I also went with one that's a personal favorite, because I feel like there's ones that are both. And for those of you who know who I am, this is not going to be a curveball. For those of you who don't know who I am, let me tell you about Lord of Emperors by Guy Gavriel Kay, which is the second half of the Sarantine Mosaic, and is pretty much as close to perfection as I have read. It is kind of like a historical fantasy based on the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century. And first off, Guy Gavriel Kay is just like my favorite line-by-line prose writer that I've ever read.
Okay.
And he was in his bag for this one. Like, dude did not hold back. And it simultaneously tells the sweeping narrative of the fall of empires and the founding of religions and all that stuff, while also focusing just as much on the lives of the little people, the cooks, the chariot racers, the random guards, maybe like the wife of a senator, and all the people who you would never see in a history book. And it manages to make both equally compelling. So yeah, that's my pick. Hopefully one day you read it, or if you have already read it, hopefully you enjoyed it.
Awesome. Yeah, I have not read any Guy Gavriel Kay, and I have been meaning to. I think I tried to start Tigana. I think that was the one, but I think I got distracted. I would love to give it a chance, because if he thinks that it's got amazing prose, then I definitely trust him on that. So I will have to check that out. Thanks, Jake. So next up is Morning Star by Pierce Brown. Red Rising was a series that I was slightly worried wouldn't stick the landing for me, but I've been more and more impressed with every single successive book in the series. Now, my favorite book in the series is Golden Sun, so this isn't necessarily just a list of all of my favorite books. Matter of fact, Changes isn't even my favorite book in the Dresden Files, for as much as I love it. I wanted a list of books that I look at as a perfect representation of the idea that the author was pursuing, and I think that Morning Star really nails that. I won't get into too many spoilers since this is the last book in the initial trilogy, but I really like how Pierce Brown told a perfect story arc of our main character, Darrow. We see him in the first book as a hostile, sometimes arrogant and foolish rebel who is out for vengeance, but he grows throughout the series, and in this book we get to see him as the much wiser leader who inspires others, like his best friend Severo and love interest Mustang. He raises up those around him rather than lording over them or stealing the show from them. He makes everybody better just by being around them, and because of that, we get to see amazing character arcs from the entire cast of characters. As for plot, the stakes have never been higher than they are in this book. What Darrow's crew is doing will either completely destroy everything, or it will save the entirety of society as they know it. Especially right near the very end, you really feel like one slip up could have massive consequences for everyone and destroy everything that they've worked so hard for up until this point. Something I love about the whole series, and you see it more so in this book than the others, is that no one is perfect. Darrow and everyone else makes mistakes and is subject to being humanly imperfect. Pierce Brown is also not afraid to kill main characters in the series, and this book has some of the most devastating deaths I've ever read. Some of them utterly destroyed me. The pacing for the series doesn't get much better than Morning Star. It balances heart-pounding action with quieter, more introspective moments. Each battle scene is vividly described and immerses you in the chaos and intensity of their struggle for freedom. Just at every turn, it's so visceral. As the final installment of the trilogy, Morningstar provides a satisfying resolution to the overarching conflict while also leaving room for more to come in the future. There is another not trilogy, but another like sequel series after this initial trilogy, so it definitely sets everything up for that. I would also say this book excels in character depth, plot intricacies, emotional impact, and thematic richness, making it a standout in the sci-fi genre. There's a reason when people, you ask somebody like, what's your favorite sci-fi book? So many people say Red Rising or a series or whatever. There's a reason why it is beloved by so many people. It's a book that not only will entertain you, obviously, but also will challenge you to think critically about just the nature of society and humanity, and also confront loss. It doesn't just leave you going, wow, that was a good book. Like, that was great. I enjoyed that. It leaves you sitting there with your freaking jaw on the floor, and all you can say is, wow, what an incredible journey. I'm actually getting a little teared up thinking about the ending to that one, if I'm being honest. Let's see. Let's take a quick break and see what Mike from Mike's Book Reviews has to say about his pick for the 10 out of 10 list. He's actually the one that got me into Red Rising, so I really hope that he didn't pick Morningstar. That would suck.
Hey, what's up, Bookworm? So Spencer wanted to know a book that I would consider a 10 out of 10. It's hard for me not to go with my favorite book of all time, but for the sake of this topic, I'm going to say Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, because I think that this is one that it doesn't matter what kind of genre you're into. Yes, this is a Western. It transcends the genre, because I'm not really into the Western genre, and this book completely just floored me, and I haven't stopped thinking about it for well over 2 years now, because it's just the most amazing, magnificent journey. This is maybe the best character novel I've ever read in my life. You will just fall in love with these characters, hate to see them go. You'll hate to see certain stick around. There's no character that goes by in this book that you don't feel one way about them, one way or the other. But it's one of those things where the journey is greater than the destination. The destination is actually not anything that I think anyone's going to be upset about, but the journey with this from Texas to Montana is just a stellar ride. And I think that anyone is going to enjoy this book, no matter where you're from, where you're located, where you've been, what you've experienced. You're going to find something to like about this book, because it's just perfect in every damn way. The writing is amazing. The character work is the best maybe I've ever seen, and it's a story that's going to stick with you for a long time. That alone, I would say this is about as perfect of a book as you're ever going to find.
Wow. That is incredible. I've heard him talk about this book on his channel a few times, and I knew that he loved it. But that is high praise, man. For that to be his 10 out of 10 book, that is awesome. It's definitely one that I am meaning to read. I am not like a historical fiction kind of guy. I actually don't really like that subgenre at all. But Mike hasn't really led me wrong. He's the one that got me into Red Rising when I didn't want to read Red Rising. I kept hearing that Red Rising was similar to the Hunger Games, which is such a wild thing to me that is something people get stuck on. It's not like the Hunger Games at all. But that was my impression, and he's the one that got me in. He's the one that convinced me to read Red Rising. Same with Empire of the Vampire. I thought it was going to be, like a vampire love story. On the cover you have this shirtless, ripped vampire guy, and so I thought, judging it by the cover, I thought that's what it was about. But, Mike convinced me that it absolutely was not about that, and it isn't. So I might have to check out Lonesome Dove, because I know that he has very, very high praise for that book, and I don't think that he gives those out lightly. All right, we have talked about Name of the Wind a lot on this channel, so I'm just going to quickly talk about Name of the Wind, which I could also interchange with The Wise Man's Fear. I think these books are highly subjective as far as who would rate it a 10 out of 10, because I know for sure that Mike would not. He would not rate it a 10 out of 10. But when I think of the very best stories that I've ever read and the criteria on which I critique things, I think that Patrick Rothfuss just absolutely nails every single one. He's known for his beautiful, almost poetic prose, but he also wrote some amazing characters that have fantastic arcs. The story itself feels like a living, breathing thing. You almost never feel like you're just, I don't know, like on rails, like how some other books feel. But when I first read this story, I felt like I was just wandering through it, taking time to look at all the beautiful sights along the way. The pacing constantly kept you interested without feeling rushed in the slightest. It gave you time to like smell the flowers, you know, like the pace kept going, but it allowed you those moments to kind of sit with it and just enjoy it. And at the end of the day, I just wanted to spend more and more time in this world with these characters. You see the hunger from the community desperately wanting a third book, and I don't think you get that kind of reaction from something that is anything below a 10 out of 10. I think that the fantasy community is probably divided on Kingkiller, especially with Patrick Rothfuss's recent antics. Like, I definitely have not been supportive of him as a person, but I think the Kingkiller Chronicles will always be a 10 out of 10 for me. So lastly, we have an entry from a new friend of ours, Steven from the Fantology podcast. He came on for a Creators Corner episode, and we cannot wait to have him on again. So take a look at what his 10 out of 10 book is.
Hey everyone, it's Steven from Fantology, and my favorite book and book that I have to give a 10 out of 10 to is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This has been my favorite for years, since I was 17 or 18, so there's definitely that nostalgia factor that has to be accounted for, but I think the book still holds up very well. And unfortunately, you do have to put aside the whole Rothfuss drama and the fact that the series very likely will never be completed. It's really hard to be too excited about the series itself, but the book one, really is 10 out of 10. For me, there's three main things that go into giving this a 10 out of 10 rating. Number one is the amazing writing and prose, really the best that I've come across in the science fiction fantasy genre. Cannot be beat, adds a ton to the story. I always say that as long as the writing doesn't like take away, you're not distracted by the writing, then it's great, that's professional. But this does so much to add to the ability to just read through and enjoy it, and it's beautiful to read the whole thing. Number two is the emotional stakes of the whole book. It's a first-person narrative, and some people think that the main character is a Mary Sue. I won't disagree that he certainly is very capable and can do almost anything, and so from that perspective, like, okay, it's a valid argument. However, I think it's fine because of two reasons. One, it's an unreliable narration, so it's hard to say like what exactly is actually happening and what is he just exaggerating on. And number two, you get inside the main character's head, Quoth, so much that you really feel these emotional stakes. And even though he is hyper capable, the circumstances that he's placed in and the things that he has to deal with emotionally are so powerful and so strong that, you know, he's got real challenges. He's not this guy that's just waltzing through life. And yes, he's able to overcome these things, but that's what's interesting about a narrative, is the ability for your main character to be competent and to make progress and to withstand these trials. And so I think that's done super well. For me, the third reason is this book is just fun to read. It's got a couple of my favorite tropes in fantasy, which is the coming of age and the magic school. It's done in a new way. I mean, back then this was kind of a new twist on especially the magic school type of thing. Obviously nothing that we had never seen before, but I think it really kind of bridged the gap between Harry Potter and more adult fantasy. And so for that reason, a lot of people hopped onto it, enjoyed it. I've recommended this to a lot of people, some of them not really science fiction fantasy fans, and it's universally well regarded. Everyone loves the book. There's a lot of disappointment over the direction of the series, but as far as the single book goes, I think you really can't go wrong with The Name of the Wind, and for me, it's a 10 out of 10.
That's so funny. I had no idea that he had also picked Name of the Wind. So hopefully you like hearing about Kingkiller. I swear to God, I did not put these in the same place on purpose. But yeah, he made a lot of really good points. One thing I picked up on was the whole Mary Sue thing. I think a lot of people will, like I said, the community is divided. Like the fantasy community in general is kind of divided on Kingkiller. You either love it or you hate it. There is really not a whole lot of in between, at least not that I've seen. And I think that people, will say that Quoth is a Mary Sue, but I really don't think so. I think that he's not just like magically good at everything. He's clever, and he has to find workarounds for the obstacles that are in his way. It's not that he doesn't have flaws or troubles, because he absolutely does. He has so many. I would say he has more flaws than things that are Mary Sue-ish about him. I just think that the one major thing he has going for him is that he's incredibly clever, and that can kind of look like a catch-all for any sort of flaws or wrongdoings. I don't think it is, because he's like no situation is the same. It's not like he's just nobility and gets away with everything because he's of a noble lineage or something like that, or like he's incredibly good looking so everybody just treats him a certain way. He's having to find a workaround for every unique situation, and because his cleverness skill is the one thing that's like way up here, he's able to do that in really creative ways. So I've never really thought of him as a Mary Sue. I totally understand why somebody could get that impression. But I really think that he is just a really clever guy, and he's good at figuring out, ways around things, and that's just kind of who he is. Also, Stephen mentioned that the university in this book, it kind of bridges the gap between, Harry Potter and reading adult fantasy. And I never really thought about it that way, but I think he's right, because Kingkiller was one of the first like real fantasy books that I read. I had read like Dresden Files and Night Angel and a couple other like lighter fantasy books, but Kingkiller was the first one where it's like, this is a fantasy book. Like, this is like, there is so much to the lore of this world, and there's so many rabbit holes you can go down. And it was really the first book that made me think about fantasy in a larger way and a deeper way, and made me question what I'm reading more so than the other books I had read up to that point. And I think the university being there is a good selling point for people that are moving from YA into fantasy, because like you said, you have the coming of age. When the book starts, Quoth is 6, 8, something like that, and we watch him grow into his teenage years, and that could partially be perceived as like YA. I would not under any circumstances call this book YA, but I think that Kingkiller does bridge that gap where it's getting in those people that are coming from the young adult reading into the adult reading. And yeah, good job, Steven. I hadn't really thought about that before, and it led to this whole tangent, so thank you. So I have one last one with a caveat, and we were kind of just talking about it for a second there, and that is, you know, I have to talk about Harry Potter at least once in this video, but I don't know that any of the books are a perfect 10 out of 10. They're super fun and engaging, and believe me, I love them so damn much, but I haven't decided if any of them individually stand up to something like Name of the Wind, but I will say that in my opinion, The Half-Blood Prince, the 6th book in the series, is the perfect Harry Potter book. It perfectly includes all of the best aspects of the previous books. The huge action-packed moments, the mystery being uncovered throughout the book little by little that make the trio work together and even test their friendship, maybe pull them apart a little bit. The big emotional moments that tear your heart out, especially this book. Oh my god. And just the feeling that everything is about to get a lot more serious in the story. It's kind of like the Dresden Files changes, except it's the penultimate book rather than like a mid-series shakeup. Now, I personally would rate this book a 10 out of 10, but I understand that it's probably not standing up to things like Lord of the Rings or Kingkiller, so I can't, in good conscience, objectively put it on this list, but I do want to say that I think it is the best Harry Potter book. Speaking of Lord of the Rings, of course, Fellowship of the Ring is a 10 out of 10 book. I loved that so much. I'm just not talking about it at length in this video because honestly, I think there's many other YouTubers that are able to do that better than I am, who actually know the lore and know exactly why Tolkien was such an incredibly talented. So I'd recommend seeking some of them out because there's entire channels dedicated to that stuff. But yes, what an incredible book. Yeah, like I said, I wouldn't be able to sit here and go through like piece by piece like why it's so incredible because yeah, there's just other people that would do that a million times better than me. So an honorable mention that was so close to making the list was We Break Immortals by Thomas Howard Riley. This was my favorite book of 2022, I think, and it takes everything you love about Sanderson's magic system and makes it really intuitive but also somehow more complex, and it takes all of that stuff and puts it firmly in a rated R epic fantasy. It does not leave anything out, and it has such incredible characters and story arcs. This is like a 9 or 9.5 out of 10 for me, I think. I think Thomas absolutely knocked it out of the park with his debut novel, and I can't say enough good things about it. There are some things that hold it back just that little bit with some of the descriptions and multiple lore and history lessons being a little too clunky and drawn out at times, I think. I hate to say that, but I think it's true, and I think it just holds it back enough to keep it out of the like perfect 10 out of 10 range. There's certainly times throughout the book where you just want to get back to the action, but they are so worth reading to get the full picture of the story and the characters. So just know that this book will always be a very high recommendation from me, and I wanted to add it into this video because I mean, it's damn close to a 10 out of 10. I don't think you read this book without walking away from it like, oh my god, what did I just read and I need the sequel right now. He actually wrote a novella that is a prequel to this book, and that one was incredible. It's called The Monsters We Feed, and he has another one coming out sometime this year, I think, and I can't remember what it's called, but he's got another one coming out that's going to bridge the gap between We Break Immortals and the official sequel. So definitely check that out. There's a ton of stuff to read. The only downside is there's no audiobook as of right now, and I cannot wait for the day where all of his books have audiobooks because they deserve it so much. Oh my god. And of course, there's other subcategories like what is the perfect 10 out of 10 grimdark book specifically? I would say that We Men of Ash and Shadow and Oathbreaker are. Both of these perfectly bring to life what I see in my head when I think of grimdark as a genre. But I'm also heavily biased towards these because they just scratch the exact itch that I have for this stuff, and also because I'm very good friends with both of the authors, so I didn't want to add these to the official list because I wanted it to be as objective as it possibly could be. I'm also really good friends with Thomas Howard Riley, so that was another reason why it's not like officially on the list. Even though every list like this is going to have some bias in it, which I recognize, but I still think that both of these books are huge standouts in the grimdark genre, and if you're into that, then please read these because you will not be disappointed. They are fantastic. So far, everyone that I've got to read these has absolutely loved them. Whew, okay, so that's gonna be it for now. I'm sure there's other books that I could have mentioned, but I actually really struggled with choosing books for this, not because I think there's so few, but actually so much more that I was going through my library of books and realizing how many of them I wanted to give a 10 out of 10 to, like Dean Koontz's Soul Survivor, or Blake Crouch's Recursion, or even Stephen King's 11/22/63. But in the end, I decided to wait on those and think about them a bit more, and maybe even do a reread before I made a final decision on a rating for those. And I also decided to pretty much just stick to the sci-fi and fantasy books for my recommendations, although I don't know, I guess those ones could be classified as sci-fi as well. But let me know if you'd like me to do more of these. I think it would be fun to list my favorite 8 out of 10 books or 9 out of 10 books, which I guess would really just be a massive recommendation list video because there's so many books I love that fall into that 8 or 9 out of 10 range. Or maybe I'll do a 10 out of 10 suspense/thriller video, which would probably largely consist of like Dean Koontz, Stephen King, Ronald Malfi, and Blake Crouch. Those would probably all fall into that. Maybe I'll just make a video about my favorite non-fantasy and sci-fi reads. Let me know if you want that down in the comments below. This has been a huge tangent and I'm so sorry. But with that, I'm gonna get out of here. Hopefully you have some new books and series to enjoy. I really hope that everyone goes and reads King's Dark Tidings, especially. Honestly, just because that series is so good. I think if more people gave it a chance, I think it would be one of the biggest series ever. But yeah, all the links to our stuff and our guest channels will be linked in the description. You know what to do. You know how that works. If you'd like to watch our podcast episodes live as we record them, then check out our Patreon. I'm currently trying to get Gabe a new webcam, so I'd love it if you even just supported us for a month over there. It would really mean the world to us and it would help us get closer to that goal. But thanks so much for watching, everybody, and remember that you will always be a 10 out of 10 to me. Is that cringy? I think it's cringy. And a big shout out to Caitlin. Thank you so much for backing us at the Greenbone tier.